Hey guys, I'm going to try to very quickly go through this presentation with you because my dogs are about to lose it. It's almost the witching hour. They're ready to eat. So, okay, we're going to talk really quickly about just a couple of economic development theories that you need to be familiar with. So, I had this idea yesterday when it was really nice out that I was going to use sidewalk chalk to present all this stuff to you. So, hopefully, it works out and hopefully, you can read. But remember that basically all of this stuff is covered by your textbook and your AMSCO books. If you have any questions, make sure to look at that. So we're going to focus heavily on world systems theory and Rostow's economic development model. So world systems theory is associated with Wallerstein. Basically, it is an economic theory based on dependence. So it's a dependency model. And what it says is that no country exists in isolation. So I would say, let's consider if we were going to talk about athletes, okay, if we were going to say who's the best quarterback of all time, people have their candidate. A lot of people say Tom Brady. A lot of people would say like Peyton Manning. I can't even think of any others right now, which is really sad. I'm sorry. My mind's trying to total blank. But anyway, with those two guys alone, just thinking about them, part of their value as a quarterback is reflected in or by their receivers and their rushers. If the people that you're throwing to, the people that you're handing off to, if they're not doing their job, then it doesn't make you look good either. So they are in a sport that is based a little bit on dependency. It's a team sport. Everybody's got to pull their weight. So world systems theory operates in a similar fashion that, what's happening in China impacts the rest of the world. What's happening in Italy impacts the rest of the world. What's happening in the United States impacts the rest of the world. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. Wallerstein's theory is based on three categories: the core, the periphery, and the semi-periphery. So the core, countries that are MDCs, countries that are sort of at the core of the world, if you will. So countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, countries in Western Europe. And basically the way he determines this, he uses something called an azimuthal model, which is where you are looking at the world as a flat plane, okay, so a 2D object, but you're looking from the North Pole. So instead of what we're used to, where it's like the Atlantic Ocean is kind of in the middle of the map, the North Pole would be in the middle of the map. And he's saying that these guys are in the core, like if you drew a circle around the North Pole, these guys would be the closest to the core. They're in the core countries. Next is the semi-periphery. So these are middle income countries. And I like to use the analogy of like your vision. So if you think about like the core of your vision, it's like what's right in front of you, the main stuff that you see. The semi-periphery is filling out sort of the outside rim of your vision. So it's like things that you see, but you may not notice automatically, which is why soon to be drivers, we tell you not to text and drive, because that semi-periphery stuff can be a kid on a bike or an old lady crossing the street or something. But things you see that are not as important, not as much part of the core, much part of the center. The semi-peripheral economies are middle-income economies. Places like India, Mexico, Brazil, China, or South Africa. This is just to prove that it's really me, because I know my artwork is so good that you would potentially think I hired someone, but no, it was me. I accidentally wrote South Africa twice, and you can see my shadows starting to not cooperate with me here. But the periphery, ignore South Africa. That was a mistake on my part. The periphery is LDCs, or low income countries. So Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, Kenya, somebody else, but who knows? Hard telling. These are countries that would be on the outer fringe. And again, if you thought about it in terms of that model I mentioned, where it's like you're looking at the North Pole, places like Zimbabwe and Kenya, I mean, they're pretty far from the North Pole. So these are countries that are on the periphery of the world economy, as it were. So some things that set Wallerstein apart, again, because it is a dependency theory, it is possible that the failure of one country could lead to failures of other countries. It is possible for a country to change. So, like India used to be in the periphery and now they're in the semi periphery. Or China, for instance, used to be in the periphery and now they're in the semi periphery, almost into the core in a lot of ways. So, again, these systems do not exist in isolation. But there are some criticisms of Wallerstein, and I hope that you read some of those in AMSCO because I'm not going to go into them here. One form of dependence that doesn't really fit in either model, but that you're supposed to be aware of based on the learning target, is commodity dependence. I'm sorry, this one's a little bit tricky to read. Commodity dependence is what that says. When one primary export dominates the economy. So the example is oil. Basically, it's that old saying of like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if oil is your number one, like 80% of your exports, 90% of your exports, as long as oil prices are high, you're going to be really, really rich. But the second they start to drop, and remember, they're based on supply and demand like everything else, the second they start to drop, that could be really devastating for your economy. So it's important to be diversified in your economy in order to protect yourself from market shocks. So countries that are commodity dependent are countries that are really focused on exporting like one key commodity. My dog is trying to go outside. I'm going to speed this up. Speaking of dogs, here's my co-teacher from yesterday. This is Bo. He's our older dog. He's going to be 10 in November. Bo's really into Rostow, apparently. Rostow has an independent model. It's a linear model. So there's like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. He says that countries can improve on their own. So they basically would ignore what other countries are doing. To me, if you think of that athletic example I gave, this is like a sprinter that in a lot of ways, you're training on your own and it really doesn't matter what your teammates are doing. Rostow mentions 5 categories. So the traditional society, pretty much what the name implies, this is an agricultural-based society. Preconditions for takeoff. Typically, Rostow would say that what happens here is like 2 or more entrepreneurs innovate in such a way that it starts to change the economy. And so now maybe we're starting to move into like an industrial economy. In a lot of ways, this is modeled directly off the Industrial Revolution. So you think traditional society, then the preconditions for takeoff are like, oh, what if we invented the cotton gin or the spinning jenny or something to make this process easier? Takeoff is what the name implies when things start to accelerate. So, maybe some of the first like steam engines and things like that. And then the drive to maturity, basically innovations that improve existing technologies. The poor dog is waiting for the door to open itself. She's like, if I hit the bells enough, it'll do it. And then number 5, the age of mass consumption is basically what we're living in now, where all the commodities and goods and services a person would need are readily available. Sorry, this picture should have been at the beginning, but I got mixed up here. So the dependency model, countries do not exist in isolation. Remember, Wallerstein's world systems theory is a dependency model, whereas Rostow's model is an independent model. Countries can advance without other countries, and it doesn't really matter what's going on elsewhere in the world. And to wrap it up, I love you guys. I miss you. I can't wait to see you. I hope it's sooner rather than later. Everybody stay safe out there, be healthy, and try not to binge watch too much TV and watch Tiger King because it's crazy. Okay, bye.